This is Open Parameter Podcast, conversations about the intersection of life and art with artists from around the world. Come chat with us on our Discord server and get monthly early access to episodes by becoming a supporting member today at patreon.com/openparameter. Welcome back to Open Parameter Podcast. I'm Del Cook. So far on this podcast, we have focused primarily on musicians, composers, and visual artists. Today, I'm pleased to introduce the first writer we are interviewing, Hayley Nelson. Originally from the foothills of Northern California, Hayley now lives in Dallas, Texas. In addition to her work as a freelance dramaturg and playwright, she is a 2019 to 2021 NNPN Producer-in-Residence with Kitchen Dog Theater. She is also currently involved in Cry Havoc Theater Company's 2020-2021 season. Her other accolades include time as Mark Bly's assistant at the Kennedy Center MFA Playwrights Workshop, as a production assistant at the Pittsburgh CLO's New Musical Weekend, as an intern at the Co-Festival, and as the Fall Literary Fellow at Geva Theatre Center. And really, that's just the tip of the iceberg. It is my pleasure to introduce Hayley Nelson to Open Parameter Podcast. There we go. Hi, Hayley. Did I pronounce Geva right?
You did.
Good.
You nailed it.
Okay, great. Wonderful. How are you? So you live in Dallas proper?
I do. Yeah. Now. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're not that far from each other, to be honest. I live in Plano.
Oh, cool.
So, pretty soon here, I want to have it'll probably be an online sort of party with all of my guests, and you'll be invited.
Fun.
So yeah, like everyone I've interviewed, and maybe some of our patrons, if we can get more patrons on our Patreon. But yeah, just have like a big Zoom party or do it on the Discord, and because part of Open Parameter's mission is to sort of like connect. Sort of, we're building an army, is the way I've described it. An army of artists. So.
Yeah, Dumbledore's army. That's cool.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was joking with Abby and Stajar and Hannah about that. They said, "Oh, we're building an army," and I posted a GIF in our internal chat of Dumbledore's army. So I normally open these podcasts by doing the stupid thing of saying, "How's the weather there?" And but I know what the weather is in Dallas. So. By the way, this is the first time that we've had someone. This is not a criticism of other people, but this is the first time we've had a podcast guest with the exact same audio setup as me, which is very helpful for post production. Anyway, so I'll just jump right in with the questions. So you describe yourself on your website and pretty much anywhere else that you can find information about you as a dramaturg, which was a phrase that until now I was unfamiliar with, and I suspect most of, or at least many of my listeners might be as well. So how do you define dramaturgy?
Totally. Yeah, it is sort of a niche field. A lot of people don't know what it is, and it's more popular sort of in other areas. You don't see a ton of us in Dallas. But I consider sort of a dramaturg as being a playwright's best friend. So to me, I'm there to support the writer's process as they develop new work. I'm there to listen to their challenges and help them problem solve, sort of be the early audience member that gives them objective understanding of what their play is. There's also production dramaturgy, which is where if you're doing a play that's already been published or produced, if it's by a dead playwright like a Shakespeare, they might hire a dramaturg to come in and do some sort of advising around like the context of the play, the historical circumstances, ideas about what the people would have lived like, the things going on at that time while the writer was writing. So sort of a professional best friend / geek.
Sort of the combination between a historian and a playwright, it seems. But you're also a playwright yourself. Like, you write plays yourself.
I do, yeah.
What I always like to know the influences of my guests. What sort of early influences did you draw upon, or do you draw upon with your plays, or what kind of stuff do you like to write about?
Yeah, I think when I kind of go back and I think about, where did I kind of start my love of storytelling? I kind of think it's Fantasia, the movie.
The
I kind
original
of
one.
loved, yeah, the original one
Hmm.
for sure. Something about these visuals that are telling one story and this music that allows you to still interpret that story seemed really exciting to me. Um, and so I think, my plays tend to be really visual, really theatrical. I kind of play with, it's not always just people on stage talking. Sometimes there's dance or sometimes there's really long silences. Um, so I think that's kind of a big influence for me. Music videos as well, huge for me. I loved how you can tell a really long story in a short amount of time. And then, of course, I'm a huge poetry fan, theater, obviously. I love sort of lighter playwrights that work on sort of magical realism and poeticism, and also really visceral, dark horror plays. I kind of bounce between the two and love everything in between.
Um, you mentioned long silences, and that's interesting to me. I assume you mean long silences where there's perhaps a lot of movement on stage.
Times, and sometimes I think, if theater is supposed to tell us something about our reality, people stop talking sometimes, and I think we have those people who we love being in comfortable silence with. We
Hmm.
have awkward silences all the time. We have silences where we're learning something or realizing something. So I think all of those are really interesting to watch on stage, especially, when the actor is doing their job and feeling that whole moment out. It can be really exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah. We were both at Meadows at the same time, although I mentioned before we started recording that I don't think we really ever ran into each other. And I unfortunately robbed myself of seeing any of the plays actually at Meadows. I just was so busy as a musician,
Yeah,
and
of course.
I never had a chance. But I would be really interested to see that kind of moment, or to watch that kind of moment in one of your plays where there's just a lot of silence. And um like, can you, obviously we can't watch them right now, but like, can you cite an example from a specific play maybe that you wrote?
For sure, yeah. One of the first things I did at Meadows, actually, and one of the first plays I've ever written, and one of the ones that gets produced the most, is a short play called On Staying Indoors. And it's this couple, and they're married, and they're at the end of the world, and they're sitting on their porch, and the sky is turned orange, and they're just watching everything go away. And I think it's 8 pages long, but it's 20 minutes long because there's so much silence that I require in the play. And it's really sort of, the play starts with, uh, the characters' names are Mr. and Mrs., and Mr. is sitting in a rocking chair, and Mrs. is smoking a cigar in a rocking chair, and they're both just kind of sitting in the darkness and listening. And that goes on for a couple of minutes, and then, we go into the next scene. Um, and I love it because it forces you to drop into their world and meet them where they're at. And they're not telling you anything about themselves. You just have to give these people the benefit of the doubt that they're going to tell you a story worth telling without telling you that they're going to tell you a story worth telling.
Right. What is there in that opening moment when they're just looking, and there's complete silence? They're not talking, but is there sound of any sort? Is there maybe perhaps music, or is there maybe a sound effect applied or heard in the space?
Yeah, the different productions that have happened have all sort of tackled it different ways. At various moments in the script, I'll say, while a silence is happening, that there's the sound of wind or the sound of bugs. At one point, I say there's the sound of sun. There's
Hmm.
a radio at one point. And I love theater for that reason, that it is so collaborative and people have to work in teams and you have to kind of relinquish control to a sound designer to figure that out for you. Um, so sometimes people have put in sound, some people played music underneath that moment, some people literally just let it stay in silence. And I think all of them were worthy approaches for sure.
I actually know this. So you premiered that at Meadows.
I did, yeah.
So I actually know the sound designer for the theater um, department at Meadows. Jason Biggs. I'm curious to know how he handled that silence.
Yeah, well, this was actually, Meadows has an incredible student theater program. And so basically, you just write a proposal and they'll let you do whatever project you want. They'll give you some money to experiment. So this was actually as a student theater. I did a festival called Damsels, and it was an all-female playwriting theater festival. And it was directed by women and written by women. And it later turned into a festival that I did with House Party Theater at the Wild Detectives. So it was actually sound designed. That first production was sound designed by Claire Carson, who works at Kitchen Dog Theater with me, and was at Meadows as well. She was a senior when I was a freshman. I think you graduated the same year as me, right? 17?
Actually, I graduated the year after. I graduated 18.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Cool. Yeah. So
Yeah.
she graduated 3 years before me. And so she did that sound design. And, we kind of were collaborating back and forth for a while on what it should sound like. And so I sent her some like rockabilly stuff. I sent her, I think I don't know, some like local natives or something like that. And then I also sent her just like, I was like, I think there's bugs. I think it might be somewhere in the American South. And so she, did all of the work of like looking up what bugs might be in that region and, trying to figure out what frequency the sound of sun might sound like and that kind of thing. It was really incredible.
Yeah, those of us who've lived in the South for most of their life, as I have, or in, I've never really been to Northern California, so I don't really know what I've heard it's nice up there, but, people who've lived in hot places, they know what the sound of sun is. I mean, there is a sound. I don't know if it's probably not emitted from the sun, but the sound of, heat waves, this sort of deafening, just like dull roar of just,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
there, it's real, especially in August, or July, right in the middle of summer, or like the sound of cicadas.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and being from Northern California, I'm in the foothills, so
Hmm.
it gets either incredibly hot or like kind of cold. We
Yeah.
don't really go too far. But I remember coming to Texas and hearing cicadas for the first real time. I'm used to crickets, but cicadas
Right.
were sort of a new experience, and I was like, wow, that is a specific sound. And I think that play was sort of my first American South-ish play.
Do you like the sound of cicadas? Or does it
I
annoy you?
do.
Really?
I
Okay.
really do. Yeah, there's something kind of comforting about it.
I've always felt that too. I love the summer when I just get to walk outside and just hear the phasing of all the cicadas around me.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite sounds.
Yeah.
So let's walk back a little bit. How did you become a writer, a playwright, a dramaturg? When did you first realize like this is what I want to do?
Yeah. Well, writing I think came first. As a little kid, I was pretty creative all around. I was interested in being an artist at one point and realized I don't really have the skills to cut that. But I was always sort of drawing stories and writing stories and children's books and novels. And it was just always something that captivated me. Like I remember being 7 and pitching a story to my parents, like with a little like storyboard that I had made up. And so I think that was when I knew that writing was going to be important to me. And then I was an athlete most of my childhood. And then I got into like late middle school and I injured myself and I was going into high school and I was like, oh, well, I need to find something else to do. And theater just kind of became the thing to occupy my after school hours. Um, and as I did that, I knew I loved acting. I knew I was interested in directing. And I was also interested in science and art history. And as I was trying to sort of do that thing you do when you're in your later high school years, trying to figure out what direction your whole life was going to go in, I knew I wanted to do all of those things. And I was good at many things. And how was I going to combine all of them? And I knew that theater was sort of the one thing that challenged me in all areas of my life. And I discovered this word dramaturgy, which is sort of this mix of science and history and writing and research and creativity and art, and just thought, oh, that's something that I think I could do, that I'd really like to do. And SMU, where we went to school, it doesn't have a dramaturgy program per se, but it does have the freedom to sort of choose what parts of theater you want to explore. So I did some writing classes and some directing and some acting and got injured again, and acting kind of flew out the window for me. But I knew that scripts were always going to be important to me and stories. And so I started working at Kitchen Dog Theater, where I've been for the past few years, while I was still in school, and sort of started working in the DIY theater scene. And dramaturgy became the natural path forward for me because I didn't want to be seen all the time. I don't like, I'm a little bit shy in that way. But I also knew I didn't have the thing directors have of where you sort of enjoy sculpting the whole picture and sort of steering the ship, if you will. I just wanted to really see someone and see them for all of their thoughts and help them make something the best version of what they wanted it to be. And that's kind of dramaturgy. So I kind of settled there.
That's fantastic. That's really cool. I mean, I have a lot of respect and it's just sort of awe for people who like figure out what they want to do sort of in high school and then they just stick with it. I've never been able to do that. You know, I've just been like, how does someone accomplish that? You know, you mentioned Kitchen Dog, and that seems to be a very central focus of your career. Talk about your role at Kitchen Dog. Talk about Kitchen Dog itself. You know, like what, because I've heard about it throughout. You know, just being in Dallas. But what exactly do you do there, and what do they do?
Yeah, so Kitchen Dog is, a medium-sized theater here in Dallas. They are a core founding member of the National New Play Network, which is this, as it sounds, national network of new play theaters that support new work. And they are really interested in plays that have questions about sort of identity and community. And so I started working there my senior year of college. I just asked a professor. I said he was a founder of Kitchen Dog. And I walked up to him and I was just like, I really think dramaturgy is going to be my thing. I'm really interested in new plays and I know Kitchen Dog does that. What can I go? What can I do? And so he said, yeah, come to a rehearsal. So I went to a rehearsal and, Tina Parker, who's one of the co-artistic directors, just emits this really friendly energy and really supportive energy. And so I just walked up to her and said, hey, I think I'm a dramaturg and I want to work on new plays. And I know you do those. Can I help you? And she was kind enough and saw enough in me to say, yeah, of course you can. And so I started off sort of designing lobby displays for them, contextualizing these plays with these big ideas or themes or historical backgrounds and putting them sort of in this lobby of their temporary space to make it feel like they had more ownership over the space and to sort of invite the audience into the play from the second they walk into the theater. I also started running their New Works Festival as their co-coordinator, which is this crazy ambitious thing they do every year, where my first year I was there, we accept plays that are not produced before, and we accept them through the New Play Exchange, and we had the opportunity open for, I think, 3 weeks, and we got 1,000 submissions of plays. And so my job was to sort of, yeah, exactly. My job was to sort of sift through those and assign them to readers so that they could get evaluated and whittle that 1,000 down to like 4 or 6. And then after a couple of years of doing that, I was able to really make them my artistic home. I got a Bly grant through the Literary Managers and Dramaturgs of the Americas in association with that theater to explore community engagement as dramaturgy. And then after that, I got the Producer-in-Residence opportunity from the National New Play Network. And then that's what I've been doing this past couple of years. And through all of that, I've also transitioned into being their manager of literary and community initiatives, which means I sort of help them look at new work. I dramaturg some of their plays. I'm also creating new programming to say, how do we get people involved in new plays? How do we get people involved in our theater? How do we serve people with our work? So that's been my role for the past couple years.
Well, it seems like Kitchen Dog really opened up the doors for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's cool. You mentioned that it's part of the NNPN, which I'm sorry, what does the NNPN stand for again?
Yeah, National New Play Network.
National New Play Network. I could have figured that one out. Would you say that's sort of an endemic issue of the world of theater in America, of getting new work performed and written?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we're seeing new plays more and more now. I think, when the National New Play Network started, I think they really have opened up a pathway for writers to advocate for their own work. They kind of remove some gatekeepers in that way of having this very specific path where, you have to get an agent and the agent maybe gets you jobs and then maybe you get to see your play on stage at some point and maybe you invite someone enough to like see that play that they want to do your play too. They instead gave people the tools to sort of write their own plays and put them out into the world themselves through the New Play Exchange, which is essentially this massive online database where you can upload your own plays and have people read them. So in that way, I think, it maybe was a bigger issue in the past than it is now. I think it's really changed. But I think that there are still some issues with new plays. I think they're so important because they can capture these moments in history, we like Hamlet because it says something about, our feelings, right? It talks about mortality, which are these questions we've all had forever. And I think because it happened in history, you're able to feel validated that people have been wondering about this for, hundreds of years. And so I think that's the gift that new plays give us, is they can kind of capture a time now and hopefully reflect it back to people later. And I think the issues around new plays getting published still are sort of getting trapped in this cycle of, you can get a staged reading of your play or a workshop of your play, but is your play ever going to get produced and seen on stage? Maybe not. People feeling like they need to self-produce to get their work out there, not knowing how to crack this sort of opaque system of theater. And we're seeing a lot of work about sort of decolonizing theater and destructuring theater, especially this past summer through WeSeeU, White American Theater, and National New Play Network is doing a lot of that work. So many organizations are really trying to get new voices into the mix.
Would you say there's a lot of market saturation? Well, market saturation. What a weird business term to throw in here. Would you say there's a lot of saturation of a lot of? I mean, you described at one point that you received 1,000 submissions. That's a lot. That's a lot to sift through. Would you say there's a lot of saturation with just how many playwrights are out there trying to get their plays? And that's a contributing factor.
Yeah, I think the internet has just blown it open, in the way that Instagram has opened things up for photographers and artists, the way that YouTube opened things up for content creators and, filmmakers, the way that so many platforms have opened up things for musicians or podcasts. I think that the internet also did that for theater. So now instead of, having to write a query letter or a cover letter and print your copy of your script out and, get it bound and then figure out what the mailing address is and mail it through the actual physical mail and hope somebody reads it. Now it's just a click of a button, which I think is great and accessible for a lot of reasons, and also creates a lot more work on, I think, the end of the theater, who's receiving all of these options,
Yeah, it's the question of, the gatekeeping of the 20th century was specific producers or specific companies, and then just the process being so, as you described, being so opaque. And now it's a little less opaque, but now there's more people, and so it seems like, and this applies to I think everywhere in the fine arts, that the gatekeeping has sort of shifted from being specific people and or less so specific people, and now the process is you have to fight everyone else, for attention.
That's so true. And I think in theater, we're still relatively small. There's no YouTube equivalent of theater really, other than I guess YouTube. But that's what we're all dealing with now in this pandemic is theater that's produced online actually theater. And people are doing really interesting discourse around that. But yeah, I think there is this competition amongst other people, and there's this very limited amount of people who can support new plays. Plays take time and they take resources, and it's not quite the same as a Spotify hosting someone's brand new album they just created that they made themselves. It requires a huge collaboration of people. So yeah, it's kind of, and I think, we're still opaque as an institution. I think New Play Exchange has opened some stuff up, but, there isn't a giant list on every theater's website about here's exactly what we look for in plays, and here's how you can guarantee that your play will be liked by us, and even if we like it, that it will get produced because we have X amount of resources to do that. It's all complicated.
Well, I hate to, it's somewhat relieving to hear that.
Yeah.
Because being,
I hope so.
it's somewhat relieving to hear that other, it's musicians are not alone in this struggle. Composers are not alone, because trying to get your music performed is incredibly difficult, and or even heard, you know, or trying to monetize through that is incredibly difficult, you know. And so that sounds kind of Schadenfreude almost, of like, oh, thank God someone else is suffering, you know, but that's not what I mean, you know.
Yeah. No, totally. I mean, that's, I think, why I do what I do as a dramaturg is, especially for plays. I mean, I don't know if you experience this as a musician, but plays kind of, at least in our minds, can only exist in front of an audience, and a
Mhm.
large audience, a group of people who clap for you and see you
Yeah.
and validate your work. And as a dramaturg, you know, my goal, I think, every time I work with someone is to say, you know, you wrote this thing and this thing exists, whether it's seen on a stage or not. And that doesn't mean that if it's not right now, it won't be later. But either way, you know, you labored over this thing, and your labor should be recognized and validated. And you know, it does mean something, whether it's, you know, on Broadway or not.
Yeah, I've missed hearing applause through this pandemic. Like, you know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
as a my primary percussion teacher throughout life, John Lee, once told me, he's like, that is the most addicting sound. Like, that's really what we're there for, is that we play our thing, and at the very end we hear applause, you know.
Yeah.
That's what we want, you know. And throughout the pandemic, I've missed hearing that. And you know, how has the pandemic affected? That's a central theme of this whole podcast,
Yeah.
right? Is
Sure. Yeah.
is how the pandemic has affected various artists. How has it affected your work and your life in general?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, you know, despite my list of things that I do, I'm primarily freelance, right? So like I do all of these things sort of from my house anyway, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of the time. So I was already working from home and making theater from my house and making theater in unconventional places. So that part of things isn't new to me. I think the harder thing is like what you're talking about is I'm not able to go see it. I can't go
Yeah.
experience it with my friends. I'm lacking that community. And also just, you know, watching people suffer, like watching
Yeah.
people not be able to do these projects that they had worked years and years and years to do. The amount of plays we've probably lost in this time because, you know, plays that were written for 2019 are not the same plays that resonate with what we're all experiencing in
Yeah,
2021.
absolutely.
So that's been something I think I've really been grappling with. And then of course the Zoom play question of what is that, and is it worth pursuing? Is it a new medium, and will it stick around? Those are the big questions, I think.
Okay, that's something I hadn't considered, the Zoom play. Because, you
Yeah.
know, in the music world, we've been trying to figure out how to either teach, you know, through this box, right, or how to perform, which in, you know, only certain entities have the kind of streaming and technological capability to do real nice, you know, takes a lot of money to have the gear and the know-how to really pull off a good live performance, and doing it with multiple people in different places just isn't really possible given our internet infrastructure. But the Zoom play, I had not heard of something like that. What is that medium?
Yeah, it's rapidly changing. People have really kind of explored it during this time. Some of it is doing readings of plays that are meant for the stage as if they were a staged reading, but just on Zoom, which I
Hmm.
think, you know, is effective in its own way. Developing plays on Zoom, you know, creating new works, and like me as a dramaturg, sort of just having meetings with someone and talking about their script. That's been happening. And then, of course, there's the people who are really trying to explode the medium. So, you know, people who are trying to make work specifically for Zoom. That's something that I assisted with at Second Thought Theater here in Dallas. They commissioned a writer to create a play specifically set on Zoom, and see if we can create a theatrical experience that way. So yeah, that's kind of been there's been some cabarets that have happened on Zoom, you know, variety shows. And then there's been people who have been working even outside of Zoom. I've seen a couple of really cool Instagram plays. I've seen some cool plays through the mail, you know, that are sort of like immersive in that way.
Huh.
Yeah, it's revealed some really interesting discourse around what is theatrical, what does theater really mean, and is it we're sitting in a room full of people, or is it we're engaging with something, or is it that
Yeah.
we're watching something?
Yeah. The I would imagine that you described, you know, writing a play specifically set in a Zoom setting. You know, like two people or five people chatting over online, or having a business meeting or something. I would imagine that especially that'd be something that most people that right now could, you know, really identify with, and probably laugh about. But I would imagine there's only so much that you can do with that, perhaps, and that you're kind of locked into like, okay, if you're going to write a Zoom play, it's going to be about, these sort of like 5 or 6 specific topics of what people talk about or do over a Zoom call.
Yeah, there's so many opinions on it. I mean, in some ways, I won't say always, in some ways, I enjoy Zoom theater because in some ways it feels more freeing. I feel the closest to the way I did like making theater in high school,
Oh,
where it's kind of, there's no rules
yeah.
and you can kind of do whatever you want because no one knows what you're doing yet.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's a baby at this thing. In some ways, I found that incredibly freeing, but other people would totally agree with you and say, you're kind of literally trapped in a box and,
Yeah.
there's only so many stories you can tell where people don't touch or,
Mm-hmm.
gather in one room. Yeah, so it's definitely divisive. And there's people who also are just, and I get this, they're just like, I don't want to come off of my 5-hour workday or 8-hour workday, where I'm on Zoom and spend more time watching something on Zoom and have to try to buy into this, like, it's a separate world that you don't understand.
Yeah.
That sort of release we give in theater of buying into something that's fictional when like you're looking at the same thing you look at with everybody else every day.
Yeah. Pretty early on in the pandemic, I started reading articles about, why is talking like this, why does it tire you out so much, and it was all focused around like we have to focus more on people's facial expressions. Apparently that really tires us out, mentally, just having to like okay, what, figure out really what your facial expression is depending on, people's camera angles and whatnot. And I mean, I'm kind of the same with you. I wasn't doing a lot of work from home, but I'm kind of a homebody as a person.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, like, I'm a pretty avid, like, video gamer, and so I was already kind of used to, like, talking to people over the internet, not through voice, because it's mostly people I've never met in real life, right?
Yeah.
Or, excuse me, not through face, video, because it's people I've mostly not met in real life. So I feel like some of us were a little more prepared unintentionally for this new reality.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I remember, it's funny because this medium, the Zoom play or sort of the Zoom movie is not necessarily new. It sort of predates the COVID-19, because I remember there were these 2 horror films in I think 2017 or 2018 that kind of looked pretty cheesy and pretty stupid anyway, because they weren't the best horror films. I can't remember what they were called, but it was basically like, I remember one of them centered around like cyberbullying and a girl who committed suicide and then haunted this group of kids through the internet while they're talking, and then like someone puts their hand in a blender for some reason. I only saw the trailer because I'm not a horror film connoisseur, right? But that was one of the first things I thought of when you mentioned Zoom play.
Yeah, it is. You're right. It's sort of a medium that's, as old as time. And we have to deal with technology in theater, I think. And I think it asks a great question of can we do it well? Are there other mediums that do it better? But, we already started seeing things like Facebook on stage and, people having to text each other on stage. Like those are things that we do in real life. And I think some people aren't interested in seeing that level of realism on stage or feel like theater can't capture technology in the same way that like film could. But I love watching people grapple with the question and trying to figure it out. Yeah.
Well, I think I don't even know if I would call it an advantage. The difference, the obvious difference between film is that you can get any camera angle you kind of want, and you can't necessarily do that with theater. The camera angle is kind of limited to the audience's point of view,
Yeah, that's so true.
Well, moving on. I'm terrible at segues.
I love. We in theater we've got blackouts, so you just did a blackout.
Oh right, yeah. I should. Here, I'll do a fade to black in the video. Just fade right back. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, when I was looking up your resume, and thank you for sending that over to me, by the way. It was very helpful. And just looking at your website, which is also beautifully designed.
Thank you.
Everyone go check out HayleyNelson.me. It's a fantastic website. It's really, really great. You are incredibly busy. You have done an insane amount of work for someone, your age, and just how'd you do that? I mean, maybe you're not so busy now, or maybe the busyness has increased in the pandemic. I don't know, but how do you find so many opportunities and just have the stamina for that kind of stuff?
Yeah, thanks. That's very flattering. Yeah, I just have kind of been me since I was born, like I've just kind of always been, I don't want to say singularly minded, but like when I was telling you about like I made a storyboard as a 7-year-old, like I also went into like a adults writing class at our local library at the age of like 10 and was just like, hello, I would also like to write a book even though I am not an adult and I am here now. So like I've just kind of always been this way.
Yeah.
I think work is fueling for me. I also had like 5 part-time jobs in college, and I just know it's something that has to get done, so I do it. But I also, part of being a dramaturg, I think, is piecing together these bits of a story and trying to find the bigger story, or trying to challenge things or do things in new ways. And so, as a kind of lonely dramaturg, there's not a ton of us down here in Texas or in Dallas in particular. I just had to figure out a way that I wanted to do this thing, and I had to tell people why they should let me do it and pay me to do it, and I had to figure out how I was going to do it when there weren't exactly like job postings for it. So I just kind of I found it exciting. It was like an exciting challenge. I just love what I do, and I just wanted to figure out a way to do it. And that also meant that I was getting paid like $100 here and $200 here, and so kind of by necessity I just had to stack it up. But yeah, it's been a really exciting couple of years. It's weird to look back and clock it that way, so I appreciate you just sort of zooming out on that for me.
Yeah, well, and the way that I perceived it when looking over your resume was just like, wow, there's a lot more work out there for a playwright or dramaturg than I thought. Of course, my knowledge of the whole bit of the theater business is very limited, but it absolutely makes sense that you sort of had to create the work for yourself. That very much falls in into my understanding as a freelancer. Being a dramaturg would appear to me to be sort of like you have to know so many different things about so many different topics, like as though you're preparing to go on Jeopardy. How do you center?
No, totally,
yeah. Yeah. Do you center on a few special topics, or do you try to have a really broad range of knowledge?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I guess to sort of do my job. I guess, okay. I think this ties back into your thing about like, why do I do so many things, or how do I do so many things?
Mm-hmm.
I think one benefit that I have had, whether it's my personality or my career or something, is that I don't have such narrow definitions of what this thing is and isn't. Like I think a lot of artists put that pressure on themselves, right? Of like, I'm going to be an actor, and to be an actor, that means these 4 things. It means I'm going to, have a national commercial by this age, and I'm going to be on Broadway by this age, and I'm going to be on my favorite TV show. And if I don't do those things, then I'm not acting, and I won't do things that aren't A, B, C, and D, And I just don't have that. I just think I can learn things from everything. So like being a production assistant at the Pittsburgh CLO, that was mostly me like setting chairs up, and also, but I took the job because 1, I got to go see theater in a different city, and 2, I got to be in a room with new musicals, which I hadn't really gotten the opportunity to do, and 3, I got to watch the script change every day. So to me, that's dramaturgy. Like I'm learning these things. So yeah, I think that kind of ties into your question about like, what do I specialize in? I try to be really honest with every playwright that approaches me. So there are things that I think I always learn in the process. There's nothing that I go in and I'm like already an expert at, the Restoration period of the Civil War, which is something I've had to look up before, or you know, women's mental health in the 1800s. Like, those aren't things that I know intrinsically, but they are things that I feel like I can find. And they are things that I can tease out of people, because sometimes you don't know what you're researching until you're halfway through the process. You know, you don't know what you're writing about until you're almost done. So I have to just have research skills, basically.
Yeah.
But there are definitely jobs that I won't do, and I try to be really forthcoming with people about that. There's jobs that I'm just not suited for. You know, I always, if I'm working with a writer who's writing about, you know, their Blackness or masculinity, I always am very clear with them up front that, you know, I am not Black, I am not a man.
Yeah.
I don't have that lived experience, but I trust you as a writer that you do. So my job is to just kind of get out of your way and help you do the things that you can't do, and do the things that you're trying to figure out. And you can let me know what that is. You're guiding, you know, you're driving the train, and I'm just sort of assisting along the way.
Sort of like I've been watching a lot of the 80s show MacGyver recently.
Nice,
So
yeah.
a literary MacGyver, sort of.
Absolutely, yeah. It's like a mix of like therapist and camp counselor and best friend and historian and scientist. Yeah.
It's funny because I've interviewed so many like specialists, you know, on this show, and I've mentioned this before that I myself, I've never felt that I'm a specialist. And I've mentioned this anecdote before, is that my composition teacher in college said there are two types of people. There are foxes and hedgehogs. And hedgehogs like to burrow down into one specific thing, and foxes like to flit around to different. And I've always found myself in the latter category, and I think you, being a fox, that is, and
Yeah.
And I think you are also a fox, it seems.
Yeah, I had a I had a teacher in the 7th grade tell me that I was a bird in a box. I never understood it, but I think that that's true. Like, I do enjoy flitting around, but I also enjoy flitting in one specific area.
Yeah.
You know, and exploring every nook and cranny of that one area for sure.
I've never thought of that. Yeah, being a bird in a box, but like.
Yeah, you know, I didn't either, and 12-year-old Hayley didn't get it, but you know, 25-year-old Hayley's like, oh, there's something there.
Yeah. The things that your teachers say, and then you experience what they're talking about later in life, and you're like, oh, wow, like, now I get it. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I would imagine that you mentioned that research is such a huge part of being a dramaturg, and I would imagine that's a great way to, if someone doesn't seem convinced or something, like if you're, you know, like I'm useful to you, trust me, you know, that I would imagine that'd be kind of what you start with, kind of, is like, I'm a researcher. If if you don't want to do the real like heavy labor of you know, learning about a subject, you know, I'm your man or gal, or you know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I guess with your hedgehog fox metaphor, which I love, I'm not such a, I guess, like, my tenets of my practice as a dramaturg are friendship, joy. Like, if I had to explain the thing that I do, like why I love dramaturgy, it's because I love joy and I love curiosity and I love playing, and I love bringing that back into this thing where, you know, when we do theater, we think of like skulls on hands, and when you're a playwright, you're a playwright with a capital P, and you have to, you know, be in textbooks for your work to be validated. And I really enjoy breaking all of that down and saying, well, let's just do the thing in your head. So there are dramaturgs who are much more research savvy than I am. You know, a lot of dramaturgs have master's degrees or PhDs. I am not one of them. And, you know, not to say that that's the only work that master's degree dramaturgs do,
Right.
but a lot of them are scholars. So for some projects, I would say, you know, if it's really research heavy, I might not do it. I might just say, you know what, I'm probably not the person for this, but I'll recommend 7 people who totally are. And other times, yeah, really, for me, it starts with a conversation. So I'll Zoom somebody like this or go get coffee with somebody, and I'll say, yes, like, what are you working on? Why is this your project? Like, where are you? What's been stopping you? What's been keeping you going? And we just sort of have a conversation, and I think it's a chemistry fit before anything else. You know, you want someone who, in my opinion, you want a dramaturg who feels like they're going to uplift you and not criticize you or edit your work in any way, that they're instead going to sort of open the boundaries of your work and free you in a lot of ways. So first, I think that's a huge personality match thing. And then it'll be like, oh, yeah, I call it associative brain. So, somebody will be talking about, like in the Cry Havoc piece we were working on recently, they knew that they wanted to do it sort of about the suffragettes and institutionalized women in the 19th century. And somewhere along the line, I was like, oh, did you know about the Fox sisters, who were like the creators of American spiritualism, and they were teen girls, and they like totally just like wrecked everyone's brain about what was possible for young women in that time.
Yeah.
And so then I started bringing in, sort of associative information about spiritualism and Lilydale in upstate New York, and which is like a American spiritualist community. And that just sort of filters into things, and it changes things. So I'm always reading and I'm always looking at things, even if it doesn't seem important. Like Ariana Grande has become incredibly important to my dramaturgy, whether I want her to or not, knowing things is helpful.
Why is that, if I may ask?
I think pop culture is so important in theater. There's been times where like, I just think like some of her songs, I'll just pass them along and be like, doesn't this sound like your scene? And they'll be like, oh yeah, totally, or, pulling out the way that we would need to reference TV shows is the way that I also need to reference, 19th century Lilydale. And also I need to reference TV shows and music and songs and playwrights and weird facts that you would learn at bar trivia. All of those are tools I have to have.
There's a lot of different directions I could go there. You mentioned having to referencing things. And getting into sort of like heady, highfalutin concepts of like aesthetic. But do you ever feel, this is a weird question, do you ever feel trapped by like postmodernism? Like references? We see it everywhere. We see like every show is this, and then some shows are like critiques upon postmodernism, like a show like BoJack Horseman. I don't know if you're familiar with BoJack Horseman.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. Where everything is a reference, and then sometimes they're making fun of the fact that it's just a reference, like, oh, hi, like 1990, because it's 1992, like they make it really obvious. Do you ever feel trapped by that?
Yeah, I think one of my friends, Carson Gray, who's the artistic director at Second Thought Theater, she talks about how she thinks during this period of time, the pandemic and all of the sort of protests about police brutality have forced us into what she calls postmodernism, which is sort of this dropping of satire or that like tongue-in-cheek, like wink and a nod kind of humor. And instead we're moving into a place where we really crave earnesty and genuine and authentic writing. So I think I can feel trapped by it for sure, especially in theater, right, where we talk a lot about how our audiences can be homogenous. They should not be, and they aren't everywhere. And in certain communities, they're very diverse. But, typically when people talk about theater audiences, they say old white rich people, right?
Yes.
And so, it can be hard, especially when they're old white liberal rich people. You can kind of create an echo chamber. So, yes, you're doing a wink and a nod. Yes, everything's a metaphor. Yes, everything's a reference. But aren't you just saying this to people who absolutely understand you? And what are you actually trying to teach them or get them to connect with that they don't connect with every single day of their lives? So in that way, I can find sort of, I guess, postmodernism or just sort of, I guess, being sardonic in some ways a trap. But I also think that we need a little bit of everything,
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that we're starting to crave real, earnest, authentic writing, because I grew up, my parents are both very much older than I am. They were born in the early 50s essentially, and that's like, I'm 25, and that's somewhat uncommon to have parents that old, right? And so my parents were very much like baby boomers, and so I grew up watching a lot of the media of the 20th century. And now, like in this pandemic, my mother watches a ton of really old television shows on YouTube that she finds. And like I still enjoy it, but like there's a side of me that's like, I'm so sick of this. Like I'm tired of the cynicism and the there's a real cynicism and just dread about postmodernist thought and comedy, and satire that, now, especially, and I guess it is because of the reasons that you list, because now we're living in an era of such, I guess, I can't really say that. I was going to say now we're living in an era of where a lot of that is like, we don't have the emotional space for that. But there was just as much satire, I guess, in the 60s, right? Where there was still an incredible time of political upheaval. I guess our reaction to it is just different.
Yeah, and I think, we always say that history comes in circles, and I think, theater as well and storytelling comes in circles. I mean, I don't think you can get closer to like early Dada than like a lot of things I see on TikTok, like it totally comes in circles, and we all have, responses to things. And I think for a long time, especially, in the last presidency, which is when I noticed a lot of theater change, you're writing from that place, and you're writing from a response to that place, and trying to cope with something.
Yeah.
And I think, maybe the shift that's happening is, do we really want to cope with something by just shutting off our heart about it and just using our head? And is that actually what we want to do?
Yeah.
Maybe that's sort of a pivot that's happening. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, some people I think reacted to, and I always analyze it in terms of like 20th century brain versus 21st century brain, which is a bias. I shouldn't really do that. Because it wasn't like now we're in the 21st century and the age of information, and we have technology and the internet. It wasn't like that, like I'm just old enough to remember like a dial tone, and a modem going,
right,
and stuff.
Yeah.
So it was a gradual shift, but some people some media creators reacted to it, some writers reacted to the awful things that they witnessed by adding comedy to it, because they felt like if they can't laugh about it, then they won't be able to survive it, and I guess there was a lot of like armchair analysis of what is this problem and how can we deal with it, and I guess I see it as people have just seen through that bullshit, and it's like, no, let's really get to the heart of the problem and figure out what we want to do about it. Like I was telling my mom the other day, like I crave watching shows, and this is gonna sound really weird, but I crave watching shows these days about people making good emotional decisions and having a high emotional IQ and like working out their differences and not just being jerks to each other.
Totally. Yeah. No, I think that makes perfect sense. And I think, I mean, I'm on board with that too. I think we need a diversity of people who do the jobs that I do, right? So like these sifting through these plays and editing them and helping them come to life. It's so important that we have a full spectrum of people who enjoy the sardonic stuff and enjoy really eviscerating satire, and also people who are interested in this really heart-forward, emotion-forward work. Because I think there are people who probably need all of those things, and I think society at large will move forward, but people in our lives are individual in our timelines, and so we're going to need all sorts of work and things from all sorts of perspectives. And so yeah, it's definitely a time of change for the media that we're all consuming. And I too feel a little bit like I would love to just, I mean, at this point, like I would just love to watch people just like touch each other on stage. Like that sounds great to me.
Just do a whole play of silence of people just hugging each other and touching each other in different ways.
Exactly, totally. Well, and like one of the Zoom plays that I was working on, the one at Second Thought that I mentioned, I think a lot of people are cynical about Zoom theater because all the reasons we talked about, if you just don't want to see it, you're already seeing it, how exciting can it be? It's not really theater, you're not in a room with people. But that play is really wonderful. It's called Libra Season by E.E. Adams. And, that play is about all the things we just talked about of feeling kind of trapped and feeling like, everyone is making fun of these things and no one's being honest. And it also talks about sort of capitalism and being a Black woman in the middle of you like having beauty standards that are thrust upon you that you'll never identify with, and trying to keep it together when your world is falling apart and you're being targeted. And, and that's why I think all sorts of plays are important because, like, whether we can stomach watching a play on Zoom right now, I don't know. But I do know that it's going to be so important that that play exists in 7 years, because someone is going to need to have seen this moment captured, and someone is going to need to understand what this period felt like. And I think, 2019 felt like everything was a horrible joke. Everything was sarcastic. Everything was kind of a nightmare. And now I think we know it's a nightmare, and there's no joking about it anymore. We have to just call it out. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, doing a play, I mean, like we talked about, doing a play where where it's all focused on touch, I think would actually like scare the hell out of some people. I know it would scare the hell out of me. It would not be at this point like, oh, what a relief, we can do this again. It would be like, what are you doing? Like, oh my God, stop doing that. Like even in the middle of last year, when I would watch a TV show from like 2003 where, it's normalcy, no one's wearing a mask. There would be this switch every so often where I'd be like, why aren't they wearing a mask? Like, what's going on?
It's so real. Yeah, I was watching Freaks and Geeks with my partner yesterday, and he was like, why are their tables so small? And I was like, oh, social distancing. And then I was like, wait, the show is set in the 70s and made in the 90s, and like, I am wrong. It's weird, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be an experience to unpack that. In media. I mean, I'm sure. Have you had any dreams where I used to be a teacher, right? I used to be a music teacher, and so I would have dreams where I would be back in the classroom or back in a rehearsal, and I'd be like really close to these kids and helping them set up stuff and then conducting, and then I would snap and be like, in my mind thinking, why aren't you wearing masks? And the band director would walk in, I'm like, why aren't you wearing a mask? And then I'd wake up and I'd be like, I'm like, wait, none of that happened. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Have you had that experience?
Oh, totally. Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's also weird for like a lot of the writers I work with to write plays in this time, because, if you aren't living in a house full of people and you haven't had contact with somebody, how do you write a play where people touch each other? Like, what does that experience feel like in your body? It's exactly what you talked about. It's kind of scary. Like, it's a little bit stressful. Yeah, I totally resonate. I've had a lot of those dreams for sure.
Yeah. 2 episodes ago, I interviewed a dance collective called Human Collective, and they told me their entire philosophy of dance focuses around touch and around really close interpersonal closeness with not just the dancers themselves, but with the audience. And that basically I said, well, how was that affected by the pandemic? And they were like, well, as you might expect, we basically had to close up shop,
Yeah.
And then as a musician, like, we don't want people to touch us, anyway. Like, well, stay over there, stay in the audience. What are you doing? Yeah. So it's something that I think I had thought about a little bit more, since I also have a little bit of experience as a performance artist and kind of do wild and crazy stuff and get in people's faces, But some of my musician friends, I think, wouldn't really consider that, because they think I'm up here on stage, like away from everyone else doing my thing, So moving on, no. One of the things that you do, and I don't know how much we can talk about this, but and again, as an aside, this isn't live, and so if I ask a question that you don't want to answer, we can cut it out, right?
Sure.
But you're one of the writers on a podcast called The Grand Scheme.
Yeah.
And that podcast is hosted by John Stamos, and I was not familiar. I'm not really. It's funny. I produce a podcast, but I'm not really a consumer of podcasts.
Sure, of course.
No one heard that. Don't listen. Pay no attention. So I had not been familiar with The Grand Scheme until I was researching your background. And so how did you become involved with that project, and what is it about?
Yeah, so The Grand Scheme Snatching Sinatra is the full title. It is about the 1963 kidnapping of Frank Sinatra Jr., which is this incredibly wild story that has been lost to time in some ways, but was really sort of the peak of intrigue back in the 60s. And yeah, John Stamos hosts it. It's run, the showrunner is Sam Dingman, who hosts a podcast called Family Ghosts, and I've been the biggest fan of his work for such a long time. He tells stories in this really intimate, beautiful, thoughtful way. So this version of the Frank Sinatra Jr. kidnapping is a mix of the wildness of this entire kidnapping adventure, but also it's told by Barry Keenan, who was the perpetrator of the kidnapping. And so it's a real investigation into his brain and his life. And it's been really, really interesting. And I got involved because I've worked with Spoke, who's producing the podcast. Since, I guess, 2018. I worked with them on a podcast called Breach, and then I worked with them on a podcast called Great Moments in Weed History. And this is just the latest, and I feel very, very lucky to have been brought in.
That was a shock to me that you said that the story of the grand scheme is told by the perpetrator of the grand scheme, and it's not an actor playing Barry Keenan. That is actually Barry Keenan.
Yeah, it's a live audio interview between Barry Keenan and John Stamos.
Wow.
And obviously John narrating some bits and pieces in between.
So, without giving too much away, I have to ask, where is Barry Keenan in life at the moment?
Yeah, he's fine. He's doing great. You'll have to listen to the podcast to learn a little bit more, but Barry has lived an incredible life with a lot of ups and downs. And, he's quite old at this point. No disrespect to Barry.
Sure.
He'll be the first to tell you. But yeah, it's incredible. And we all feel so lucky to have captured this story on audio, because it's truly something I've never heard before.
Well, now I'm going to have to listen to this podcast.
Yeah.
That sounds great. So, you may have spoken about this already, but so what exactly is your primary role on the show?
Yeah, so I'm officially the writer-researcher. I think in the credits I'm something like a dramaturg or a researcher. But basically I work pretty closely with our showrunner, Sam Dingman, on looking at early drafts of scripts, making sure that the story is coherent. I do a lot of going through the audio and trying to find clips that match the outlines he's created, to help us tell the story. So things that Barry has said that reflect the plot, basically. And I also do a lot of sort of givens work, so a lot of contextualizing the way I would for a play, pulling up, what did Southern California look like in the 1960s? What kind of music was popular? When Barry says X, what does X mean? And pulling up a lot of that as well. So it's really great. I'm sort of in the early stages of the scripts, and then I also get to circle around and listen to the fully built episodes and say, what if this song could be told in a different way to help create the story, elevate this moment, etc.
So other than the grand scheme, what other current projects are you working on that you might want to talk about and plug?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the big ones. I'm also dramaturging Kitchen Dog's New Works Festival. For the pandemic year, we've everyone's favorite word, pivoted to doing a commission series from 4 writers, 2 national writers and 2 local writers. And I've had the absolute pleasure of working with these writers on sort of the 0 phase of their play. We've really built plays from the ground up. And so those will be premiering in June as sort of Zoom readings. So if you're curious about the hype, that's a good one. I'm also working on Cry Havoc season. They've got a show coming up this summer. It's called Mad Women. I'm doing a little writing of my own. So if you want to hop on New Play Exchange and see what that's all about, you can find my work on there. I just had my play, This Is a Mortality play set in an Office Depot, premiered at Urbanite Theater's Modern Works Festival, which was a really good time.
That is cool.
Thanks.
I like that setting.
Thanks. Shout out to Office Depot. But yeah, I think those are my big projects. I'm sure I'm missing something per usual, but yeah, it's a blast right now.
Oh man, now it's really raining. What advice would you give to someone younger than you who's maybe right out of high school or just starting college or maybe in high school who has discovered dramaturgy or has discovered playwriting and they like to do it and they want to do that?
Yeah, I would say don't stop educating yourself when you're in school, when you're out of school. I spend a lot of time and money trying to learn how to do the thing I do that I think I do quite well better. And I think that's important. I think the best way to get into a room is by being kind and reliable. So be kind and be reliable. Don't feel like you have to be a specialist in everything. You can be really good at the things that you do with the voice that you have and find the place that you're supposed to be. And look for grants. Grants are great. Go get some grant money.
Grant money is great. Finding it is difficult, but
Yes,
we're getting
doing
it.
grant projects has been an incredible part of my career. I've had so many great learning experiences through grants.
That's great. Well, Hayley, like I said, it's been wonderful speaking with you today. It's been great to get to know you. I regret that we didn't get to know each other in undergrad. I think we came close, because weren't you on Jillian Perry's opera project?
Yes, I was.
You?
I did one of the librettos, yeah.
Okay. See, I was on that project for a short amount of time and then realized that I know nothing about opera composition, being a percussionist,
Great.
and I just backed the heck out of that one. And it was good, because the person who took my place did a far better job than I would ever been able to do. But yeah, no, it's been great chatting with you, and I definitely I will want to talk to you again. I want to chat with you again.
Yeah, I look forward to it. This has been great. Thanks for listening to all things dramaturgy.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Open Parameter Podcast. Go check out our other projects like Open Parameter Ensemble and Open Parameter Hub at openparameter.net. Join our growing community of artists and patrons and help us fund those projects by becoming a supporting member at openparameter.net/support. Your generous donations will allow us to commission composers to write new music, commission artists to make new works of art, and provide paid performance opportunities for local North Texas musicians. Open Parameter is a sponsored project of Fractured Atlas, a nonprofit arts service organization. Contributions for the charitable purposes of Open Parameter must be made payable to Fractured Atlas only and are tax deductible to the extent permitted by law. Help support our community of artists and musicians today by going to openparameter.net/support and clicking on Donate Now. I'm Del Cook, Creative Director of Open Parameter. Abby Hawthorne is our music consultant and writer. Hannah Hughes is our graphic designer, and Stajara Danilescu is our visual and interactive media consultant. From all four of us here at Open Parameter, thank you so much for listening today. Please tune in again next week.